Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third and final day of our virtual summit, Ready, Set, Go, Accelerate Your Governance in Microsoft 365. My name is Tony, and I'm the CEO of Syskit. I'll be joined here by David and Vinko, who are going to deliver a topic, one session on governance in Microsoft 365 Groups, and you're going to see a demo of our tool, Syskit Point, that's going to help you in governing groups, teams, SharePoint sites, all things in Microsoft 365. So for today, we are going to start with David giving us the presentation. You can, during the presentation, of course, post your questions in the Q&A box, so you can use it in the GoToWebinar and post the questions. I'm going to ask these questions to David at the very end of the session. And we are also going to have a demo, as I told you. So I would like to welcome David Broussard, who is the Director of Digital Workspace Solutions at Catapult Systems. Hello, David.
Hello, how are you guys doing today?
Very good, very good. So David comes with extensive experience in IT field. He focuses in Microsoft 365 stack. Productivity is his thing. So today we are going to hear a lot of good things about Microsoft 365 groups, I guess about Microsoft 365 governance in general from David. So I'm very happy to have you here, David. I would like to ask you a couple of questions, so just so that
Sure.
the people can kind of get to know you better, a little bit better. So tell us, David, how did you get into Microsoft 365? What decisions in your career got you to this point where you are focusing on that, and give us something that other people maybe looking to do a career in Microsoft 365 can today invest their time into.
Yeah, so that story goes back all the way back to 2003, actually, when I was working for a company as a .NET programmer, and I got introduced to SPS 2003, or WSS 2.0, or SharePoint version 2 when it was out there. And one of the senior principals at our organization was very excited about it and said, this is going to revolutionize everything. And I believed him, and I think he was right. And I became a SharePoint person. And so from 2003 until 2013, I was all about SharePoint on-premise, MOS 2007, SharePoint 2010, 2013, the whole 9 yards. And then in 2013, Microsoft took their BPOS product, which was SharePoint in the cloud, and they rebranded it as Office 365. And I discovered that the thing that I had really focused on, which was how to install and configure SharePoint farms, suddenly became completely and totally obsolete. You know, and when you get out into Office 365, you never install a SharePoint farm again. And
Yeah.
I was like, at first, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm out of a job. And then as I started playing with this stuff, I realized that the cool part was I suddenly got to do things that we never got to do because we'd spent so much money buying hardware and installing servers and configuring things. We never really got around to solving the problems that organizations actually had. And of course, once you get into Office 365, you got to know some email, you got to know some Link and some Skype, you got to know some OneDrive. And then I got into the security side of things with EMS, because if I'm going to put all this stuff out in the cloud, I got to secure it somehow. And so that got me into learning about the EMS side of things as well. And so now, you know, I just think of myself as an M365 person. I still am deepest in the SharePoint collaboration teams areas, right? But you kind of have to know everything to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to get started, the best place to start is to get on Microsoft Learn and start taking some of the courses that are out there that are free. And I would really focus on Teams and Teams administration and Microsoft 365 Groups. Oh my gosh, that's what I'm going to talk about today, right? Because that is where all of the fun stuff is actually happening inside of the Microsoft space.
Yeah, yeah, and apart from governance that we're going to, that's our topic for today. What other challenges do you typically work when you do client work, and what kind of challenges people typically encounter these days when trying to deploy various SharePoint and Microsoft Teams and other projects in Microsoft 365?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the big challenge that a lot of organizations, and really this goes back as far back as I've been working in this space, is that with application development, you're going to invest a bunch of money in building an application, and you're doing it for a specific purpose. We're going to build a warehouse inventory management system or a hotel reservation system, right? We have a purpose in place. The problem with a lot of the SharePoint stuff, the OneDrive stuff, the team stuff is we don't have a specific goal that we're trying to achieve. What we're really doing is we are enhancing the productivity of our organization. And that's great. It's very valuable, and we kind of know it's valuable, but nobody really has an ROI computation around it, right? Microsoft's done some stuff with that, but people don't really believe it. So the big challenge that we see organizations face is, how do I justify spending a bunch of money to go out and buy these licenses, right? And especially get to the E5 licenses where I'm getting telephony, I'm getting all the security, I'm getting all the stuff. Why should I spend all that money? How is it really impacting my business? And we think just turning on Teams, turning on SharePoint is going to make us better. And it does, but what it really gets better is when we approach this from a business scenario standpoint and say, I'm trying to solve a specific problem. And then I can go back and point to, look at what I did with this problem. We invested this money, we got this result. Okay. So I think that's the thing I would say is the big challenge is finding those processes that benefit through the use of communication and collaboration.
Yeah. And then one final question for the end of this warm-up discussion is, if you could change one thing in Microsoft 365 today, which one thing would that be?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. Uh, I think the one thing I would change is I would make it so that the only license you could buy would be E5. Just because I know that sounds really crazy, but the reason is there's so many cool things, especially on the EMS side in E5, and it's frustrating to sometimes talk to a customer and go, oh yeah, you can't do that e-discovery feature, or you can't do this records management feature, or you don't have Defender for Office 365, right? It would be so much easier if everybody just had everything, right? And so that's why I say that.
Okay, David. So I'll leave the floor to you and your presentation. I'm just going to remind everybody that there is a Q&A box in GoToWebinar. You can post your questions, and then David and I will discuss those questions at the very end. We are also going to send you a recording of this session, as well as David's slide deck. So you will get all the information. So if you need to leave earlier, you'll still be able to review the interesting bits that you want to know more. So David, the floor is yours. Go.
And can you guys see my slide deck?
Yes.
Sure.
Everything
Okay, great.
is perfect.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to welcome you guys to a discussion of Microsoft 365 Group Lifecycle Management, or as I discovered when I did this the first time, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. I gave this presentation before, and afterwards, one of the people who was attending was like, wow, I have less hope now. I'm more depressed now. And I was like, I really want to give you guys hope. It's just difficult, okay? So my contact information is on there. Obviously, you can reach me on Twitter at dbroussard. I'm dbroussard on LinkedIn as well. On Facebook, I'm dbroussard. You can also email me, dbroussard@catapultsystems.com, and I'm happy to take questions on any of those different media and connect with you guys. So let me go over what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to introduce myself, tell you a little bit about myself, although I kind of already have, and then we're going to talk about M365 groups and why they're so important. They really are the building block. And then I have a whole concept of the life cycle of Microsoft 365 groups. And in the end, that's what governance is all about. It is about managing that life cycle from inception to archival. And then we'll talk about what tools do you have today? What does Microsoft provide that you can either use out of the box or that you can build based upon what Microsoft provides? And then we'll end up with a demonstration of some tools that you could actually purchase that are actually quite good at solving all of the problems that I'm going to lay out for you guys. And then we'll save some time at the end for some questions. All right, so who am I? As I said, if you're familiar with Les Miserables, I'm 24601. There's my singing for you guys today. I hope that didn't drive anybody off. I am the Director of Digital Workplace Solutions at Catapult Systems, and so I'm responsible for us developing solutions inside of our digital workplace, and Microsoft 365 is really the foundation for that. I do have a podcast called The Cloud Whisperers. You can find us on iTunes and the like. We've been on hiatus for about a year, but we should have some new episodes coming out pretty soon. Hopefully you guys will subscribe to that. And I've been in IT since 1990 when I graduated college, SharePoint since 2003, and as I said, Microsoft 365 since 2013. I've been around a long time doing this stuff. You'd think I would wise up and do something different, but I really love this stuff. It drives me. All right, so that's enough about me. Let's talk about our problem that we're facing today. What are Microsoft 365 groups and why are they so important? So this right here, this graphic really shows the scope of the Microsoft 365 group. It's a whole bunch of features and functionality that are provided in a single reusable element by Microsoft, okay? You always get some core elements, the things that are in blue, right? For example, when you create a group, you're going to get an Azure AD security principal in Azure AD that you can use anywhere to define who has access to things. You get a SharePoint team site collection, right? That has a OneNote notebook. You can put a planner in your Microsoft 365 group. It provides functionality to host items inside of Stream, although with the new versions of Stream, it's a little bit different, but still I can use it from a security standpoint. You also get an Exchange inbox and a shared calendar for the group to go ahead and use. And you also get a place to store Power BI items in a Power BI workspace. Now that's what you get every single time you create a Microsoft 365 group. But you can also add on additional tools. The most common one is probably Microsoft Teams, right? So with Microsoft Teams, I can go ahead and add a little bit more inside of there. I get that persistent chat, I get those channels, but really that Teams interface is living on top of the Microsoft 365 group. All the files are stored in Teams, all of the conversations are actually stored inside that Exchange inbox, right? I could add a Yammer community instead, right? If I do, then I don't get the ability to send and receive emails, but I get Yammer conversations, but I still have everything else that's available to me. I could use Microsoft Project on the web and it will be built on top of a Microsoft group. And I can use Roadmap, which is part of Microsoft Project, which is built on top of a Microsoft 365 group. So what you're seeing here is that this group is really the foundation of all of the really cool features, but most of the features that Microsoft is actually putting into and delivering today. Okay, so the cool part about this is Microsoft has made this pretty ubiquitous across the organization, and you have a lot of different ways that we can create groups. So as an example, if you allow group creation, a person can go into Azure Active Directory. And they go to portal.azure.com, they go into Active Directory, they can click create a brand new group. It's going to ask them for some information. Notice I have a group type up here at the top, right? That's over here, this group type. That's where I can select Microsoft 365 or security group or email enabled security group, right? If I do create a Microsoft 365 group, I have to give it a name. That becomes the email address. I give it a description. I decide if it's assigned, meaning I put people in it, or it's dynamic, meaning I have rules that define how the people get added to it, okay? But this is, and then I can put a sensitivity label on there, define owners, define members, all that fun stuff, right? But this is just one of many ways that I can create these groups. I could go to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Now, of course, obviously I have to be an administrator to be able to do that, but I can go to the administration center and I can say, hey, I want to create a Microsoft 365 group, okay? But that's what admins can do, and end users to a certain extent. The first one, most end users don't know they can go to Azure and start doing stuff. But if a person can simply go to the SharePoint menu, right, the SharePoint app inside of Office 365, and they can click on create a brand new site. And if they select create a team site, they are creating a group at that point in time. You can do this also from inside of Microsoft Teams, right? If I go into Microsoft Teams and say create a brand new team, what am I doing? I am creating a Microsoft 365 group and then putting a team on top of it, okay? I could, inside of Planner, go and create a brand new plan. And when I do that, it's going to say, oh, well, if you're a brand new plan, you need to either add this to an existing Microsoft 365 group, or it's going to create one for you when you go ahead and create that, okay? I can go to Yammer and create a brand new community. And when I do that, it's going to automatically create a Microsoft 365 group behind the scenes to handle the file storage and everything else that I do that I will need in that situation. I can also go to Microsoft Stream. And when I go to Microsoft Stream and I say create a brand new group, it's going to take me to the group creation from here. And then I can also go into Outlook, right? And inside of Outlook, I can click on create a brand new group. And what am I doing? I'm doing the exact same thing. I am creating a Microsoft 365 group. So by default, and by the way, this is the default behavior that Microsoft has created. Every user can create groups inside your organization. There's a few limits. They can only create 250 of them. That's a lot of groups. And if you have a lot of people in your organization, right, that could theoretically blow out your 2 million site collection limit. It'd be a pretty big organization for that to happen, and you got to create a lot of groups. And that kind of leads us to this whole thing of, well, what's the problem here? I've got lots of ways to create these things. They're obviously valuable. People want to work in teams. People need to use Planner. People want to use Stream. They want to use Project. What's the problem here? Well, the problem is every time I create one of these things, I'm getting all those core elements: the email, the calendar, the security group, the SharePoint site collection, right? And anybody can go out and create these things. And that's not really the problem. The problem is people are going to go out and they're going to create a group. They're going to create a plan. They're going to create whatever. And then they're going to stop using it because they're done with it. The real problem is, how do I get rid of these things when I don't need them anymore? Okay. So in my belief, I'm okay with people being able to create stuff. I just want them to be deleted afterwards. And I want them to go away when they aren't used any longer. Okay. So this brings us to the concept of the real concept here is not even so much governance, but governance in the framework of the life cycle of that group, from ideation to archival, from the creation to the end. You see, every group has got a basic life cycle, right? Because every group is created with some kind of purpose that's aligned to some kind of goal. I like to say, that groups really define ad hoc collaboration. And ad hoc collaboration, as opposed to personal or enterprise collaboration, is when a group of people are working on a common set of tasks for a specified period of time, right? And you think of a project is exactly that. The project team is working on the project scope for the duration of the project. And when that project is over, what do I do with that team site, that group, that team that I created, right, for that project? Well, certain things I want to keep, right? If I created documentation, as-built documentation, or other types of documents that I was working on as part of that project, I need to move those out to SharePoint where everybody in the organization can get a hold of them, right? But do I still need the status report for every week? Do I still need the conversations that we had along the way about the delivery of the project? Do I still need the recordings for the meetings, things like that? That's a different question, right? And that gets into this idea of, from a beginning into a middle when it's being used, we do have to have an end phase, okay? And so it's important for us to understand what that end phase is. So I've taken this and I've kind of built the 5 stages of group lifecycle, okay? And these are ideation, request, create, monitor, and archive, right? So this is really designed to take us from the very get-go of somebody has an idea for a group, right, through their request for the group and how we handle that, into the creation of that group. Then, and here's the important part, I have to monitor that group. I have to know when that group is no longer being used anymore, or it's no longer being used for the purpose it was intended for. And then eventually I need to archive it, not just delete it. I need to save the things that are important out of it and then get rid of everything else. And sometimes there's nothing important, right? If somebody goes out, if I went out and created David's super test group, right? Because I want to see how things work in Microsoft Groups, that's fine. Create it, have fun, enjoy it, figure out how to use it. But that's when I'm done playing with it after a couple of days, I need to delete it. And most people forget to go out and delete these things, okay? So let's talk about these steps in a little bit more detail. So let's start with the aha moment, right? Somebody has an idea that says, hey, I need to work on a project. Or it might be, we're going to work on a deliverable. My team needs to work on a deliverable. It's a project. I'm sorry. It's a PowerPoint presentation for a big webinar we're doing, and I have a bunch of people who are going to collaborate on it. I need to have a place where we can communicate and collaborate together, right? Hey, that sounds like I need email communications, right, or chat, Teams, and I need a place to store files, right? So it could be a group, could be a team, but I have this idea that I want to do something. Maybe it's I need to build a planner board so we can track all the tasks around something that we're working on, right? So the first question that user needs to know is, does something already exist that they need to go out and get it, right? And this is a difficult thing in the way Microsoft works, because if I create that group in a private manner, nobody else can see it. So we run the risk when we have a lot of private groups of people duplicating a place that they could work together because they don't realize that group exists. Now, on the flip side, obviously, we have to have private groups. If everything's public, then we don't have any good security, right? And so we have to strike a good dichotomy around that. And there's some things I'll show later on that talk about how I can take even private groups and make it to where people know they even exist, so they could say request access to it. Okay. The next question we also need to make sure we resolve at this point in time is knowing, is the use of Planner, is the use of a Microsoft 365 email group or a team or a Yammer community, is that the right solution for what you're trying to do? If I'm running a project, well, maybe that's one thing. If I'm creating, if I'm, scheduling resources in a warehouse, right? Maybe that's not the right place to do that. Maybe I should be using something like shifts instead. And then also, if we've created templates on how to use these things, right? Is there a template that I can use that can take me part of the way? Do we have a project template as an example? And then lastly, who's going to need access to this? These are all questions that are part of this ideation process, okay? And a lot of these questions are only answered through user training methodologies, okay? So we move from ideation into this request phase. And now in this request phase, the whole concept is the user is saying, I need to put in a request. It may have to go through an approval process, right? And at the end of that approval process, the site needs to be built. And so when we think about this, we already need to know the answers to, well, who's allowed to make requests? Can anybody make a request? Is there an approval process for a request? Sometimes if somebody's just requesting something that they need temporarily, I may not require there to be an approval. I can just say, yeah, you can go ahead and do this. Or I might say, no, if you're going to create a project site, I need the PMO office to go ahead and validate that that project actually exists, okay? It's important to understand who's going to own the group and who's going to manage the group. So this is an important question, because remember, if I make somebody an owner of a group, I'm actually giving them an awful lot of power in Microsoft 365. They can add and remove people from my group. They're effectively changing AD permissions at that point in time. Do we normally do that with our AD groups? A lot of organizations would say, no, we don't like that. But maybe for this, it makes more sense. In addition, every owner of a group is also a site collection administrator of the SharePoint site collection that's part of the group. That means they see everything inside that site, and they can do everything inside of that site collection. And that often worries people as well, because they're afraid that somebody's going to go out and do something that's going to mess something up, right? And lastly, as part of this request, are we going to look at this and say, well, is there going to be a lease on this? Are you going to allowed to have this for a particular period of time? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it permanent? Can you set that? First off, we really want to know when you're creating this group, how long do you need it? Okay, because all of this information feeds into the next section, right? Which is when this group is going to be created. So now we're ready to create our group, but we have another question to ask. Is this going to be created by a person? Meaning, if I say the person from the get-go can create their own group, great, we'll let them go out and create their own group. Or is it going to be assigned to a person via a help desk ticket in IT? Well, now it means that somebody's created my group, it's been assigned to a ticket in IT, somebody in IT's got to take that ticket and go create that group. Okay, that's fine. It just means there's a delay in the process there, right? Or am I going to automate it so that once the site is approved, or if it doesn't need approval, as soon as it's submitted, am I going to have a process, a Power Automate, or some PowerShell scripts, or an Azure function, or even a PnP engine that's going to go out and actually build the stuff? Okay, when we build these groups, we need to make decisions about, hey, we recognize, on-premise SharePoint, there's lots of managed paths. Up in the cloud, we get two. We get sites and we get teams. Where do I want to put these? By default, everything lives in sites. One of the suggestions we give to people is that sites should be where all of your SharePoint sites, your communication sites, your corporate department sites should all live there, right? Even if they're teams. But if you're creating ad hoc things like for projects and for ad hoc teams, put those in the teams managed path. And that means that you've actually doubled the namespace and the naming of your different groups, which can be helpful to you. Speaking of naming, we have to have it, if you don't have a naming convention, well, you actually do, it's just not a good one, right? Naming conventions are actually really important because the larger your organization, the more groups you're going to create. And the longer you wait to actually enforce a naming convention, the more difficult it becomes when you actually go back and actually enforce it, right? Because you've got a lot of things to rename. You may have URLs to change, which can cause links to break and all kinds of problems. So starting with a naming convention and making sure that when I create sites, every project may start off PRJ dash project name, or a department is D dot department name, right? I like prefixes over suffixes because if you're in things like Teams and Outlook, when you're looking at these groups, they're going to sort. Teams, I can sort the visible ones manually, but all of the hidden ones are sorted alphabetically. And when I'm looking at things inside of the administration console, when I can sort these things alphabetically and I can find all my department sites, all my project sites, all my center of excellence sites, it becomes a lot easier for people to work with them, okay? That template that we talked about earlier, if I've got a template for a project site, how am I applying that? Is it going to be done manually? Is my IT person that's taking this ticket going to create the site and then, okay, create these 5 channels, add this planner, do this, do that? Is it all a bunch of manual work, or are we going to write a script to do that for us, or are we going to use a PnP template to do that? Okay. And then there's questions around access controls, right? And we talked earlier, as part of that request process, we need to know who's going to have access to this particular site. And that can mean external people as well. Are they going to be able to join a team as a guest, or are they only going to be able to view or edit files through SharePoint or OneDrive sharing links, okay? And then from a sensitivity standpoint, we can control a lot of things through a sensitivity label. Another thing I strongly recommend is to create sensitivity labels and use that to define the major types of groups you have in your organization. A sensitivity label will let us control things like, can this group be public or private, or is it forced to be one or the other? Can it allow external members? Can I control the sharing of files from SharePoint in this? And I can even block access or limit access to non-managed devices, people outside my organization. I can make it to where they either can't get to the SharePoint sites, or I can make it to where they only view a web access of that particular area. Okay, so that sensitivity labels is important as well. Okay. Now the site's been created, right? We had our ID, we had our idea, we went through a request, we've created the site, and now people use it. Well, now's the time where we have to do something that we aren't very good at, and that's monitoring the usage. So when we're monitoring the usage, we're really trying to make sure that that group that was created is actually still being used, because eventually people are going to stop using it. The project's going to end, people aren't working on that PowerPoint anymore, that event has ended, whatever we created it for. It's likely that many of these sites are going to eventually drop down to almost no usage or no usage. Other groups, like if I create a department site for IT and for accounting and for HR, those might be in use forever. They're more permanent sites. So I need to look and see, is there activity inside of there? And that's something that you can do manually. It's a little bit easier if you go out and use some tools to go out and do that, okay? You also want to take a look and say, hey, if I set an expiration date, which I should have set back in my request phase, has that expiration date passed? Because if it has, then I need to be asking the owners, do you still need the site anymore, right? And another one, this is one's actually really big. Microsoft has done some research and discovered that when you create an external share, there's a period of time in when it's used, and then after a while, it's not used anymore. Our experience has been that most external shares are used within about 14 days, and after about 90 days, they're almost never used again. Okay. Now that might be different if I'm bringing somebody in as a guest into a team, but monitor that external usage and and ask yourself, do my external users still need to have access to the site? And I want to occasionally purge unused guest accounts from my Azure AD, and I may want to remove guest and external users from my different groups if their reason for access is no longer there. Yeah, maybe they're not coming there, but I really don't want to just trust that. What I want to do is actually have them go ahead and be removed when they no longer need access. And that actually is true internally as well, right? When I think about my internal side, do 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 my internal people still need the same access? Now, you think about this a lot of times, if a person's in the accounting department, they move over to HR as an example, right? A lot of times what happens there is I have in IT some processes that we run that moves them from the IT group or from the accounting group into the HR group, right? And they automatically get access to a whole bunch of things out there. Well, if I'm creating groups and they have assigned membership, the owners of those groups are responsible for creation and maintenance of that of the membership of that group. That means that if I'm the project manager and I'm running a project and I add Bob to my project for a couple of weeks for him to work on something, when we're done, when Bob's done, if I don't want Bob to see that information anymore, it's my responsibility to go out there and make sure that person gets removed. Okay. This means that every group owner should be doing a membership audit on a periodic basis. Okay. All right. Lastly, we get to archival. So we're done, right? What happens next? So we need to notify users that the site's about to go away, right? We often do that through email, maybe through a message in the group. Maybe we go ahead and send them a Teams message as well. Then we have questions. Are we going to automatically archive the site? Are we going to make it read-only for 6 months and then delete it? Or are we going to say, can we go ahead and archive this and make sure we go through an approval process? Can users extend that lease? Can they say, yep, I need this for another 6 months? And we go, okay, great. And what are we going to do with the content? Are we going to make it read only? Are we actually going to delete it and make it go away forever? Or do we need to keep certain pieces of that? And can we automate that? Or is it really up to the owners, the members of the group, to make sure that's going to be taken care of? And where does that content go? Are they moving it into their OneDrive? That's a bad idea. Maybe what we really want to do is move it into SharePoint sites to publish their final documents. And how long do we maintain this site after it's no longer in use? Maybe we decide I'm going to keep it for a year. Maybe we decide we're going to keep it for 3 years, right? Or we're going to use retention policies to go ahead and delete things as we go. Okay, so that's the process from inception all the way, or from ideation rather, all the way through archival. Okay, and you can see there's a lot of things we have to think about. So what tools do we have to actually go out and do this stuff? So we have some stuff out of the box. Okay, there's a lot of tools out of the box, but they're going to make you do a lot of work. Okay, so from an ideation standpoint, the big one is Microsoft Search, right? People can just go search, and we need to teach people, go search and find the groups. Doesn't help me, by the way, if groups are private. So maybe I need to go out and create a list of groups, right? And then they can look at that list of groups and find out if a group matches what they're looking for. Even if it's private, they can ask for access into that group. And then end user education is going to be vitally important. Teach people how to go through the ideation process. Maybe we should provide them with some documentation around that, or a training video. We can also use our request process to help guide them through that education process to a certain extent. Now, the request process, we could just leave out of the box stuff on, right? Let anybody create anything. We could create a Microsoft form, right? So we go into forms, let people go ahead and enter the stuff. At the end, it can send an email to somebody, even to like ServiceNow, right? Or we could have it assign a task to somebody using a Power Automate. We can use a SharePoint list to capture all of this stuff. We can also create an Azure AD group and put people in that Azure AD group and allow them to go ahead and let them be able to create things like they do out of the box. Now I can have a subset of my company that can do this. And then from a creation standpoint, we've always got manual, right? We always have templates that Microsoft has got templates that we can go out and create. They're they're a good start, but they're not great. We can use PowerShell to create this stuff. We can use Power Automate, and those provide us with more flexibility. I don't have PNP templates on there. That's kind of implied in the PowerShell area, that we could actually take a site, rip a PNP template, and then use PowerShell to go out there and create it. So let's talk about kind of how we manage this stuff from Azure AD standpoint. I can turn off groups. I can make it so groups can't be created by end users in Azure AD, and a lot of organizations do this. I can also use PowerShell to go out and create an Azure AD group that can go out and create groups, and that's pretty straightforward. I need to first create an Azure AD group. I recommend creating a Microsoft 365 group, usually making it a team that I call something like Azure AD Group Creators, right? Then we're going to connect to Azure AD. We're going to go out and use some PowerShell to get and create the directory settings, set that to the enable group creation to false. That means nobody can create groups anymore. And then this group creation allowed group ID, which is a parameter inside those directory settings for unified groups, is equal to the GUID of the Azure Group AD. So let me show you this little quick video here that kind of steps through the process. So I've got a little piece of code that I'm running here that goes out and grabs those Azure AD directory settings, okay? And you can notice I've gone up there and I've set the value of enable groups to false, okay? And now I'm going to go out and in Outlook try to create a brand new group. So I've made it to people can't create groups. So this particular user, by the way, admins can always create groups, right? But in this case, through the admin console. But here I'm going to go out and try to create a group through Outlook. And it says, I can't create this group, right? Now I can go out over here and add a member to my group called M365 Group Creators. I'm going to take my account. I'm going to go ahead and add it in. It's added me successfully. Now I can go to SharePoint. I can say, create a brand new team site. I'm going to call it Conference Demo 2. Notice it's now allowing me to actually go out and create the site. So simply by adding myself to the Azure AD group, I've made it to where I can go ahead and create this group now, whereas I couldn't before. So just putting somebody in the Azure AD group now makes it work. So that's one of the little tricks that you can use out there. Okay, in Azure AD, I can also set expiration policies. Okay, I remember I talked about that concept of a lease, right? That's great. The downside to it inside of Azure AD is it's a one policy, 180 days. I can set it to all my groups, or I can select certain groups that I want it to apply to. But if you've got lots of groups, that's going to be a lot of overhead and management to make sure that they're actually applied inside of there. Okay, and you only get one thing. So this will work for small numbers of groups, but I don't like it for large and complex implementations, okay? And then I can also block names of groups. I recommend this highly, by the way. There's a CSV file. You download the current list of blocked ones, then you add up to 5,000 words, and then you put it back up in there. Now, you can use this to get the 7 words you don't say on television, right, or improper language, but it's also valuable to go out and put things like human resources, accounting, IT, sales, operations, things that you want to use as specific names for areas. You can block people from going out and creating those, which means they won't be able to create a group called HR, right? Because you're going to do it through the admin console, okay? And once again, admins bypass this block words when they're creating through the consoles, okay? And the last thing I can do is I can set a universal naming convention. So in this case, I've set one with a prefix of G dash, right? And then I've appended a suffix, which is the department attribute from Active Directory. So if I were to go out and create a group, it would say G dash David School Group dash DSG, which is my department, right? So that's okay, but it's not perfect. It's got some downsides to it. Once again, universal. Every group I create is going to have those same prefixes. And I actually think that you really should be creating templates you should be creating naming conventions by template, which is more difficult, okay? So this next demonstration here real quickly, and I'm going to go ahead and kick this off, is about how do you go out and find all of those group names. And so what I did, you can do this once, it's relatively easy. I go out to my active sites. I can export all of the active sites inside of my tenant, okay? Now, once I export this out to a CSV, I'll go ahead and hit that. It's going to download the file. I'll go ahead and open the file up inside of Excel here, and you can see that I've got all my information inside of the CSV. I turn it into a table, so it's a little bit easier to go ahead and work with. It makes it easier for me to see, tell that I have headers. Now I can actually look inside of here, and I can see, hey, what's been created? What my template has been created inside my organization, and I can go through and say, oh, I've got all of these team sites. Okay. Now, I will save this as an Excel, right? I'll go ahead and save this as a file on what we're going to call DCB site exports, right? And save this file out, because now what I'm going to do is I'm now going to go into SharePoint, okay? So I'm going to go to a SharePoint site, and I'm going to create a brand new SharePoint list, okay? Now, this list, I'm going to say to build it from Excel. So instead of me doing it by hand, I'm going to say go to Excel, I'm going to upload that file that I created, right? And I'm going to say I want to bring this into and use this to create a list. Now, there's a few things you got to be careful with, right? The big one is anything that's a Boolean, it brings it in as a number, and then it says false or true, and Excel throws a fit when you do that. So you've got to go through and fix those. The other one is dates. They come in as numbers as well, but if you just change them to date and times, right? And it doesn't let you set Booleans, which is kind of weird. So I set it as choice, which is not correct, but it's a little bit better. Once it's all done, I'll go ahead and give it a name and call this my site listing, right? And I'll go ahead and import this in. Now, this takes a while. And so I actually took the video and sped it up right here, so it goes a little bit faster, okay? And now all of this is in there, and now I've got a list inside of SharePoint. What's cool about that is with this list inside of SharePoint, I could actually go out now and use this as a search tool, or I could build a Power App in front of it to let people look for the sites that are out there. Okay, so it gives me some ability to go out and do that. Now, the problem, of course, with doing it this way is I have to redo this all the time, and it's really a mess. So what if I did this via PowerShell instead? Well, I could go out with PowerShell and connect to Azure AD and get Azure AD groups, and you can see kind of the information it gets back. I at least get the name and what type it is, but I don't get a lot of information about it. So I could instead go out and use the SPO service and get SPO site, and now I get all kinds of information, right? And I can even go out and restrict that down to just the right templates, so I can look at groups. But that's going to be a little bit difficult as well as I move through this process, okay? So you're going to want to do one of those two things, or buy a tool, right? which is kind of what we're here for to a certain extent. I think you're going to see that a few times. This stuff can be done manually, but it's not easy. So I'm going to close up with the talking about templates, okay? Templates are important. When you create a template, you're going to have to answer a number of questions. You know, what are you calling it? What's its purpose? And you should be publishing this, right? What type of asset is it? Which path is it going into? What naming convention do you want it to do? What does it require approval? What does that look like? What is lease details and any other details about it? So here's an example of one that was created, trying to give you an idea what this looks like. I have a project working team, okay? It's a team, it's in the team's path. It's going to be P-project formal name. The PMO office can request it, and the PMO director has to approve it, okay? It's private by default. It does allow for external access, however, because vendors can be added to the team, and every 6 months I want it to be reviewed to see if it's still in use, okay? Now, the last few things we've got inside of here are the last two steps, monitoring and archival. There's a lot of things that we can go out and use. Usage reports, you get out of Microsoft. You can use the Graph API to go out and look at your usage. You can write PowerShell scripts to go out and give you reports on last activity dates and things like that. But that monitoring it's either manual or it's programmatic, because the usage reports don't give you all the detail unless you go to each individual team to look at it. And that's, if you have lots of teams, that's a lot of work, right? And then that archival process could be expiration policy, which deletes it. You could manually do it. You could write a Power Automate that says, oh, I've reached this expiration date, change all the permissions to make it read only now, right? Or I could write PowerShell that runs on a various basis and do this, okay? The danger here, right, with archival is always make sure before you delete things that people have gotten their the content they want to save out of it. And by the way, I didn't put it on there, but use retention policies to go ahead and delete these things. It doesn't delete the group, but it'll delete all the content inside of the group, okay? All right, so that leads us to the last part of this, which is which tools can you go ahead and acquire And so I'm going to pass it over back now to the Syskit guys and stop sharing my screen.
Thank
There
you,
you go, Tony.
David,
Take it away.
thank you, David, for your presentation. So we are going to have David back with us. So if you have any more questions, please submit them to the Q&A box. There's already a lot of questions, but let's see if somebody else comes up with something. And in the meantime, I'm going to welcome Vinko. So Vinko is our software architect here at Syskit, and he's going to demonstrate the Syskit ability to do lifecycle management of groups and trying to stay on top of groups roles. So Vinko, floor is yours.
Yeah. So hi everyone, hope you enjoyed this talk. I think it was very excellent and I hope you got some ideas and learned something new. So I'm gonna share my screen. Yeah, this should be it. I hope everybody can see my screen.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Yeah, thank you for the confirmation. So what I'm going to do is talk a bit about the group lifecycle features that we have here in Syskit Point, and I'm going to focus on the ending part of the groups or teams life. We had some demos yesterday and the day before that about the beginning parts, how Syskit Point can help you with the creation of group and teams, and Herboy mentioned yesterday how it can help you during the life of a group or team. So there are two perspectives here that we have at play. One is the admin perspective, the other one is the group owner perspective. For both of them, once they log in, the most basic thing that we can do is just go to the Microsoft Teams and group styles here that we see, and we get a list of all teams and groups and, well, basically anything that is connected with a group. What we can notice here is the activity column, and there's this tiny green dot that signifies activity in Office Reno group. Actually, this is a team. There are also gray dots that signify inactive teams, of course. And once we select an inactive team or group, we are presented with lifecycle management actions that we can take, such as keep, archive, and delete. This is both available for the admins and the group owners. The group owners will only see groups that they have ownership over. There's also, well, let's take a look at the keep action. What we can do here is specify a period that we want to keep this group. So 6 months, year, 2 years, whatever we want. And during this time, this group will be regarded as active. One such group is somewhere here. Yeah, here it is, Project Mercury. And we can see that Cork said to keep this until, well, whatever format this date is, let's say September. Okay, so the next important action here that we can do is ask owners to renew. So let's select an inactive group. Yes, we selected it, and we can ask owners to renew. What this does, actually Syskit Point does this, it sends out notifications and lets the owners decide what to actually do with this group, keep, archive, or delete. And if there is no answer, it will fall back and it can still be manually done via this interface. Now, all of this is fine and good, but what we really want to do is do some automation. So let's take a look at that. If we go to settings, lifecycle management, we can see here an option to define after how many days the content will be regarded as inactive, a group or a team. Once we enable lifecycle management automation, Syskit Point will send out notifications automatically as it detects inactive groups or teams. And the owners of these teams will be tasked with an action, and they will need to decide what to do, as we've seen on the overview screen. And these actions are, of course, keep, archive, and delete. We can limit the actions that they can perform. And for the archive action, we have some additional options, such as removing access for the members and owners, using some prefix or suffix. By default, we just append an archive suffix to the end of the team name. Yeah. Once these notifications have been sent out, the group owners will have a due date. In this case, currently it's set to 30 days from when they receive the notification, and they can also get automatic reminders for any uncompleted tasks. The email can be customized. You can set a custom subject, set a custom message, and a banner to make it look a bit nicer. So let's see how it looks from a group owner's perspective. So here I am logged in with Cork Blunt, my group owner, and he received an email that the sales development representative team is inactive, and it's been inactive at the time of the email for 82 days, and it requires their attention. So what can we do here? We can directly from email decide to keep, archive, or delete, and once we click on this, we will be presented with this screen where we can decide how long we want to keep it. Or if we want some additional details, we just click out of this, check who the users are on this group, or check what files are tied to this group on the SharePoint site. And of course, do the appropriate action. One more way for Cork to access this task is simply to log into Point, and from the home screen, go to My Tasks, Lifecycle Management, Resolve, any of the tasks. And here we are on the same screen that we got to from the email. As an admin, we would definitely like to know what our team owners, group owners are doing with these notifications. Are they even responding or doing anything? And this can be done by going to Home, Dashboard, Lifecycle Management, and this is a high-level overview of what they are doing. We can see that for 3 groups, there were no responses yet. 2 groups have been kept, and 0 archives, 0 deleted in the last 30 days. For more details, we can go to this overview screen. This can also be accessed from Governance, Lifecycle Management, Overview. Here we can take a look at all the inactive resources in the tenant. It also shows classic sites, Yammer, and everything else related to a group. Let's go back to the main screen. Here we can also see resources that require our attention as an admin. And what this means is that these resources haven't yet gotten a response. It's overdue, basically. The 30 days have passed. Or the group or team has been entirely orphaned and there's nobody to actually say, let's keep it, let's delete it. So it falls back to us as an admin to do it. Back to lifecycle management. Here we can see that in the last 30 days, there was a 40% response rate from the owners and a breakdown of the actions that they did. We can take a look at which groups are still awaiting responses from owners, and we can also view the history. One more thing that is important for the admins is some kind of summary, and we send this summary email weekly where we say you have 2 newly detected inactive resources and there are 72 resources that require your attention. Yes, that would be it from me. So Tony, I guess back to you.
Thank you, Vinko, for this demo. I hope everybody had a chance to kind of get a glimpse of what's going on here. So I'm going to bring up David back. So David, thank you for joining me. We got, as I said, a lot of questions regarding your presentation, a lot of comments. So I'll start with the comment to start with. So Dulcie, she's commenting that in your slide where you are listing all the ways how you can create stuff in terms of groups. She says that you missed shared libraries in OneDrive as another location to create a group.
Yeah, that is true. Yes.
So maybe for the next iteration of this presentation, you can add one more bullet to your slide just for the
Sure.
future audiences. Okay, one question we got from David is how is Planner configured and made available to users, and how does this relate to groups and everything related to governance groups?
Yeah, so Planner is set up in such a way that every plan has to live inside of a Microsoft 365 group. So, and you can have multiple plans inside the same Microsoft 365 group, right? You're not limited to one. Each group can hold a whole bunch of them. I mean, I think I've had like a dozen or more inside of a single group. So if you turn off group creation, then when somebody goes to create a plan, they have to put it in an existing Microsoft 365 group, or they won't be able to create the plan in the first place. Okay, so that's the main thing to think about. So if people have already got teams and groups they're working in, they can simply create plans inside of that. But if they try to go create a plan on their own, they're not going to be able to unless they are putting it in an existing group.
Yeah. Okay, another question that we got from Nancy is what happens in terms of governance when somebody creates I guess a private channel within a Microsoft team? How do we tackle that situation, and what are the potential challenges there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one of the questions you have to ask yourself as an organization is, are you going to allow private channels at all? Okay, because when you do create a private channel, there's a couple things that happen. The first one is, of course, it creates an entirely new site collection. And it has to. Remember, the group owners are site collection administrators. So if you don't create a brand new site collection, then they would be able to see stuff. And this way, they can be excluded from that particular private channel. That's why Microsoft did it that way. So first question is, are we allowing it at all? Or should they just create a different group? If you do allow it, then those groups are going to be created. They're going to live out there. Those channels are going to be created. They live outside of there, and that means that when you're going to archive this group, the private channel site collections need to get archived as well. And that's mostly going to be manual, right? So you need to think about that in your process of either the manual archival or any automated that you do.
Mm-hmm. And this is my question, like in terms of like when you work with different clients and you try to understand how they're going to use the system, what is your general approach? Would you say when you start working with them, would you suggest giving more flexibility to the end users, or like closing some of those potentially problematic things like private channels or external sharing or things like that? So what would be like some generic advice for companies out there?
Yeah, so a lot of it's going to depend upon the culture of your organization. I've worked with organizations that are very open, let their users do all kinds of things, and they just roll with the fact that that organic kind of growth is going to lead to some disorder. Okay, and I've also worked with organizations that are kind of like the iron fist of control. You can't do anything unless we tell you you can. Every organization lives somewhere in between, and you've got to find your sweet spot on that governance spectrum. Okay, but what I normally tell people is for the pilot, you're gonna want to keep things relatively small. Not everybody's going to be licensed necessarily, right? Run your pilot, and I would say really focus in on what it is you're trying to accomplish from a business standpoint. A lot of organizations turn off guest access, turn off external sharing because they're afraid of it, right? They're afraid of, oh, people are going to share files out of their OneDrives or out of SharePoint, right? And I'm like, well, do you allow attachments in email, right? I mean, it's the same thing, okay? So organizations tend to start out really shut down, but I say really go to the business and ask them, how do you plan to use this? What is the business reason that you're doing this kind of thing? And then craft a solution for them.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, understanding the business challenges is the biggest part of that. Okay, we have one more question, which is more for demo, and that is, can you manage private channels with Syskit Point? Yes, we can do that, and we are continuously working to add all the new features that are coming to the channels as well in the future. So you can manage all different kinds of exceptions that are possible with the teams and everything. Okay, so I think we should wrap it up here, David. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, and I hope we will be able to host you again in the future. We are going to send everybody a recording, slide deck from David, and all the other materials like case studies that we did with some clients trying to help them manage their Microsoft Teams and Groups estate in their tenants. So thank you everybody for joining us for this virtual summit, and we'll see you soon in one of the events in our virtual space here. Thank you, David, and goodbye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Bye.